The quiet suburban street looks ordinary, almost peaceful. Neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, a stillness that gives no warning of what's about to happen. Inside one of these homes lives 43-year-old Crystal, a mother of 3, whose life is about to end in the most calculated way imaginable, in just moments. Crystal's mother will arrive at this house and step into a nightmare she will never forget. But before that happens, before the sirens, the confusion, and the devastating truth, there is a man calmly going about his morning routine. That man is Daniel, Crystal's husband. He leaves for work like it's any other day, no panic, no visible distress, no indication that only minutes earlier his wife lay bleeding in the garage of their own home. To the outside world, Daniel appears normal, composed, even routine. But beneath that calm exterior is a secret so carefully constructed that it has been months in the making. For nearly 4 months, Daniel has been orchestrating what he believes is the perfect crime. Fake identities, burner phones, manipulated narratives, emotional deception, every step designed to push suspicion away from himself and toward an invisible anemia stalker who, according to Daniel, has been terrorizing his wife. And the most chilling part, for a while, it works that police chased the wrong suspect. Investigators followed digital trails that Daniel himself created. Even Crystal's own children are unknowingly drawn into the lie, fed just enough fear and misinformation to accept the story. He wants them to believe that, to understand how something this calculated could unfold, we have to go back months before Crystal's death, when the first warning signs appeared. Crystal and Daniel seemed like a stable, educated couple. They shared a home, 3 children, and a life that looked comfortable from the outside, but behind closed doors, their marriage was strained. The cracks weren't explosive or violent, but they were real distance, emotional disconnection, and a growing sense that Crystal wanted out. And then, something strange began happening. Crystal started receiving messages. At first they were unsettling but vague anonymous texts that hinted someone was watching her, someone who knew her schedule, someone who knew where she'd been. The messages weren't constant, but they were persistent enough to plant fear. Soon, that fear turned into certainty. Crystal believed she was being stalked. She reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles near her home. She felt watched when she ran errands. She couldn't explain how someone always seemed to know where she was. Her anxiety escalated to the point that she contacted police, asking for help. An officer arrived to inspect her car, searching for tracking devices or anything that might explain how the stalker was following her movements. The vehicle was checked thoroughly, but nothing was found. Still, the fear didn't go away. The officer reassured Crystal, gave her safety advice, and promised continued attention to the situation. On paper, it looked like the start of a standard stalking investigation. But in reality, something far more disturbing was already in motion. Because the stalker wasn't a stranger, he was living in the same house. Not long after Crystal's report, police received another call, this time from Daniel. He claimed someone had broken into their home. According to him, he'd seen a person fleeing the yard, and when he checked the garage, he noticed something was missing. The spare house key. It seemed minor, but the implication was serious. If someone had taken that key, it meant they could come back. The responding officer advised Daniel to change the locks immediately. It all sounded reasonable, logical, concerning. What no one realized was that this alleged break-in wasn't a random event. It was step 1 of a much larger plan, a carefully planted incident meant to support the story Daniel was building. Proof that someone was targeting their home. Evidence that danger was real. From that moment on, every strange message, every reported sighting, every escalation of fear fit perfectly into the narrative Daniel wanted authorities to see. And 9 days later, that narrative took a darker turn. Crystal received a message that gave the stalker a name, a man from her distant past, someone she hadn't spoken to in decades, a face she barely remembered. To Crystal, it felt like the mystery had finally revealed itself. To Daniel, it was the final piece he needed. And from that point forward, the lie was no longer just believable, it was lethal. 9 days after the reported break-in, Crystal wakes up with a familiar knot of anxiety sitting heavy in her chest. Fear has become part of her routine now. Every sound outside feels suspicious. Every unfamiliar car seems like a threat. Eve, her own driveway no longer feels safe. She moves through the morning on autopilot, getting the kids ready, making coffee, checking the locks twice before leaving the house. Nothing unusual happens, and yet the tension never leaves her. Then her phone buzzes. It's a message request from a name she hasn't seen in over 2 decades. Anthony. Krista freezes for a moment, staring at the screen. Anthony was someone she dated briefly as a teenager, a relationship so short and distant that it barely exists in her memory anymore. They hadn't spoken in years, certainly not recently enough to explain why he would suddenly reach out now. The message is blunt, crude, and deeply unsettling. He says he looked her up, mentions traveling to Colorado, suggests they hook up, as if time hasn't passed and boundaries don't exist. Crystal feels uncomfortable, but not terrified, not yet. Old acquaintances resurfacing online isn't unheard of. She decides to ignore it and move on with her day. But the next messages change everything. They come fast, aggressive, insulting, and impossibly specific. Anthony comments on her appearance, makes cruel remarks. Then he mentions places she's been, places she visited earlier that same day. He references her car, her license plate, even her dentist appointment. Crystal's stomach drops. This isn't random. This isn't coincidence. Someone is watching her now, fully convinced that Anthony is the person behind the weeks of anonymous harassment. Crystal's fear skyrockets. The messages stop feeling digital and distant. They feel physical, immediate, close. She begins to change the way she lives. Cameras go up around the house. Dash cams are installed in her car. She stops going anywhere alone if she can avoid it. She begins carrying a concealed handgun, just in case. Sleep becomes almost impossible. Crystal starts documenting everything. She creates a detailed log spreadsheet listing dates, times, phone numbers, messages, and screenshots. Every threat, every strange comment, every escalation is recorded. If something happens to her, she wants there to be a trail. Nearly a month later, another message arrives, one that sends a wave of terror straight through her. Anthony emails her a photograph. It shows Daniel, her husband, at his workplace. The message is short but loaded with menace. A comment about how Daniel drives, a warning disguised as a joke. The meaning is clear. He knows where your family is. This is no longer just harassment. It's intimidation. Crystal realizes she can't handle this alone. She hires a private investigator, hoping to dig into Anthony's background, addresses, phone numbers, digital history. What comes back only adds to the confusion. Anthony appears to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Multiple phone numbers, multiple addresses, different states, nothing stable, nothing consistent. It's as if he's constantly moving or deliberately trying not to be found. On Halloween night, Crystal finally calls the police. She explains everything, the history with Anthony, the sudden messages, the escalation, the photo of her husband. She makes it clear she's afraid not just for herself, but for her children. The officer takes her seriously. A report is filed. The case is forwarded to detectives. Within hours, it lands on the desk of Detective Andrew Martinez, a seasoned investigator familiar with complex harassment cases. Martinez schedules a formal interview with Crystal. When she sits down with him, days later, her fear is unmistakable. She explains how Anthony seems to know things he shouldn't, how he keeps finding ways to contact her even after she blocks numbers and locks down her social media. She shows Martinez the PI report, the dozens of phone numbers, the trail that goes cold again and again. 2 things immediately stand out to Martinez. First, the stalker is persistent, organized. This isn't emotional outburst behavior. This is someone willing to put in time and effort. Second, Anthony's digital footprint doesn't behave the way Martinez expects. It's messy, scattered, almost deliberately confusing. Still, based on everything in front of him, Martinez reaches the same conclusion as everyone else. Anthony Holland is the stalker. And whoever he is now, he's far more dangerous than the teenage boyfriend Crystal once knew. What no one realizes yet is that Anthony's name has been placed exactly where someone else wants it, and while detectives begin chasing him, the real threat is already much closer, watching every move, waiting for the moment when suspicion finally settles somewhere else. By early November, fear has become the background noise of Crystal's life. It's there when she wakes up, it follows her through the day, it settles in her chest at night when the house finally goes quiet. The messages keep coming, new numbers, different formats, emails when texts are blocked. Every time Crystal thinks she's shut one door, another opens. The stalker adapts faster than she can react, and that alone terrifies her. To Crystal, it feels like Anthony's obsessed. To investigators, it looks like a man who refuses to let go, and to Daniel, it's all unfolding exactly as planned. Crystal becomes hyper-aware of her surroundings. She scans parking lots before getting out of her car. She memorizes license plates. She checks mirrors constantly while driving. At home, she reviews camera footage obsessively. Even when nothing appears out of place, sleep is fragmented and shallow. So, nights, she barely sleeps at all. Daniel watches all of this unfold from inside the house. He comforts her, reassures her, talks about security, about protecting the kids, about staying strong together. To anyone watching, he looks like a devoted husband standing beside his terrified wife. But beneath that role is something else entirely. Daniel isn't reacting to the stalking. He's managing it. He knows exactly when the messages will come. He knows how they'll escalate. He knows when to pull back and when to push harder, just enough to keep Crystal afraid, but not enough to make her doubt the identity of her tormentor. The goal isn't chaos, the goal is control, Krista continued. Working closely with the police, Detective Martinez sends out warrants to phone companies and email providers, requesting records tied to the stalker's accounts. Unfortunately, the process is slow bureaucracy, backlogs, legal delays. Weeks pass, and during those weeks, the stalker remains free to operate. Meanwhile, Daniel reports feeling helpless. He tells police he's scared, that he doesn't know how to protect his family. He mentions installing more cameras, buying security tools, sleeping lightly. Everything he says reinforces the image he wants detectives to see: a husband under siege. When Martinez interviews Daniel formally, he notices something subtle but unsettling. Daniel seems deeply emotional, but his emotions don't always align with his words. He expresses guilt, fear, frustration, but there's a strange precision to how he describes events, almost as if he's narrating instead of remembering. Still, nothing concrete ties Daniel to the harassment, and Anthony remains the obvious suspect. Throughout November, the messages grow darker. The stalker starts implying that Crystal is part of something dangerous, that she's helping him, that Daniel should be afraid not of the stalker, but of his own wife. These messages don't go directly to Crystal, they go to her children, subtle at first, then increasingly disturbing. The stalker frames himself as someone trying to protect Daniel, someone exposing a secret plot, someone warning the kids that their mother isn't who she seems. It's psychological warfare, and it works. The children become confused, uneasy. They don't fully understand what's happening, but they sense something is wrong. Tension fills the house. Trust begins to erode in ways Crystal can't see. Daniel, meanwhile, positions himself as the victim. He tells the kids he's scared, that he doesn't understand why someone would do this, that he just wants to keep them safe. Slowly, carefully, he shifts the emotional balance of the household. Crystal notices the change, but she blames the stress, the stalking, the exhaustion. She never imagines the truth. Near the end of November, the messages suddenly stop. Days pass, then a week. No new threats, no emails, no texts. Finally, an explanation arrives. But stalker sends one last message saying he can't come to Colorado anymore, that he has a girlfriend now, that talking to Crystal is too risky. For the first time in months, Crystal feels something close to relief. She lets herself breathe. The cameras remain. The precautions stay in place, but the constant dread eases just enough for her to hope. The nightmare is ending. Daniel encourages that hope. He tells her maybe it's over. Maybe Anthony moved on. Maybe they're safe now. What Crystal doesn't know is that this silence isn't the end of the stalking. It's the final setup, because Daniel needs one thing before he acts. He needs everyone, including Crystal, to lower their guard. And once that happens, the story he's been writing for months will reach its final chapter. December arrives quietly. For Crystal, the shift is subtle but unmistakable. The house feels calmer. The constant ping of her phone, once a source of dread, is gone silent. Days pass without threats. Nights pass without panic, but for the first time in months, she allows herself to believe the worst might be over. The stalker hasn't contacted her since the last message. No new numbers, no emails, no cryptic warnings. Even the private investigator comes up empty-handed. Nothing recent, nothing active. To Crystal, it feels like survival. To Daniel, it feels like permission. With the fear receding, routines slowly return. Crystal focuses more on work again. The kids relax. Laughter cautiously finds its way back into the house. The tension hasn't vanished completely, but it's no longer suffocating. Daniel encourages this sense of normalcy. He talks about moving forward, about rebuilding, about focusing on the family. He frames the past months as something they endured together. And in doing so, he strengthens his role in everyone's eyes. The protective husband, the steady father, the man who stood firm when danger came to their door. But behind the scenes, Daniel is making final adjustments. He studies schedules, times, camera placements. He knows exactly which cameras can be disabled remotely and which ones can't. He knows how long it takes Crystal to drop the kids off and return home. He knows the house inside and out. On the morning of December 13th, everything looks ordinary. Daniel leaves for work, just as he always does. Crystal takes the kids to school. There's no argument, no raised voices, no indication that anything is wrong. But after dropping the kids off, Crystal returns home. Unexpectedly, she pulls into the garage, she closes the door behind her, and she never walks back out. At some point during that narrow window of time, the home's security system shuts down. Every interior camera goes dark. Only the exterior garage camera remains active, capturing just enough to mislead investigators later. Crystal is attacked inside her own garage. The assault is sudden and brutal. She never has time to react, never reaches for the gun in her purse, never makes it to the door. When it's over, Daniel leaves the house and goes to work. He walks into the building, greets co-workers, attends meetings, acts normal. By mid-morning, Crystal hasn't answered texts or calls. Daniel waits, then, carefully, he makes the call he's been planning for months. He contacts police, saying he can't reach his wife, mentions the stalker, mentions the threats, mentions how worried he is. It sounds genuine. Police respond quickly. An officer is dispatched to the house for a welfare check. At the same time, Daniel calls Crystal's mother, asking her to stop by the house. Another calculated move, ensuring someone else will discover what's inside. The officer arrives first. From the outside, everything looks fine. No broken windows, no forced entry, no obvious signs of trouble. He's about to leave when something catches his attention. The garage. He pulls closer, peers inside, and sees a body on the floor. The call for backup goes out immediately. Medics rush in. CPR begins, but it's already too late. Crystal is gone. As paramedics work, officers secure the scene. A stab wound is discovered. What initially looked like a fall is quickly confirmed as a homicide. And just as the reality settles in, Crystal's mother arrives. She sees enough to understand her daughter is dying. An officer gently pulls her away before the full horror can sink in. Outside, neighbors gather. Family members arrive one by one. Confusion, shock, grief, and then Daniel arrives. He rushes toward the house, only to be stopped by officers. He breaks down, cries, shakes, apologizes. He says all the right things. I didn't protect her. I should have been there. This is my fault. No one questions him. Why would they? From every angle, Daniel looks like a man who lost everything. But investigators are about to learn something that doesn't fit. The door wasn't forced open. The ring camera was covered with tape, and someone inside the house had complete control over the security system. The illusion of safety that allowed this crime to happen is the same illusion that now protects the killer. For now, the scene outside the house is heavy with grief. Family members stand huddled together, holding one another as officers move carefully in and out of the home. The street fills with flashing lights. Neighbors whisper. No one fully understands what they're witnessing, yet Tonelli that something terrible has happened. Daniel stays close to Crystal's family. He leans into them, accepts their comfort, allows himself to be held as if he's barely standing. Every movement appears unsteady. Every breath looks labored. He repeats the same phrases again and again, as if stuck in a loop. I should have done more. I didn't keep her safe. I failed her. To everyone watching, his pain seems real. Officers treat him gently. At this stage, Daniel is not a suspect, he's a victim. A grieving husband whose worst fears have come true. The stalking narrative explains everything. There's a clear villain, a clear motive, and Daniel fits neatly into the role of the devastated survivor. Inside the house, investigators begin processing the scene. The garage tells a strange story. Crystal's body lies where she fell. Blood patterns suggest a violent struggle, but not a prolonged one. There's no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. The door appears to have been unlocked. More concerning, the Ring doorbell camera has been deliberately taped over. This wasn't impulsive. Someone planned this. Officers fan out through the home, checking rooms, closets, windows, looking for any sign the attacker might still be inside. They find nothing. Whoever did this is already gone. Thus medics prepare to leave. An officer notices something inside Crystal's purse, her handgun, fully loaded, untouched. Crystal never even had a chance. Detectives arrive and take control of the scene. Detective Martinez is among them, and the moment he steps into the garage, something feels off. Not wrong enough to accuse, but wrong enough to linger in the back of his mind. The staging is subtle, to clean, to control. Outside, Daniel is eventually escorted to sit with family, while officers continue their work. At no point does he resist. At no point does he question the process. He complies with every request, answers every question, offers access to whatever police need. It's flawless. Later that day, Daniel is taken to the station for a formal interview. Standard procedure. They tell him. He agrees immediately, but at the station, Daniel recounts the stalking from the beginning. The break-in, the missing key, the threats, the fear. He describes Crystal's terror in detail, mentions the ex-boyfriend, emphasizes how helpless he felt. His timeline is precise, almost too precise. Detectives ask about the security system. Daniel explains how the cameras work, who has access, how long they've been installed. He mentions the earlier break-in as the reason for adding more cameras. When asked about the day of the murder, Daniel maintains he left for work, as usual. He says nothing out of the ordinary happened that morning. He insists Crystal was alive. When he left, Martinez listens carefully. Then he notices something strange. Daniel cries, but no tears fall. His voice shakes, his face tightens, but his eyes remain dry. It's not proof of anything. People grieve differently. Shock can manifest in many ways, though Martinez makes a mental note. Meanwhile, detectives begin speaking to Crystal's children. They're shaken, confused, traumatized, and what they say is deeply disturbing. They explain that the stalker had been messaging them too, warning them, suggesting their mother was involved in something dangerous, that she might hurt their father, that Daniel was the real target. The kids say they were scared but also conflicted, because the messages made it sound like their mother was hiding something. This revelation alarms detectives. Whoever the stalker was, he wasn't just threatening Crystal, he was manipulating her family, turning her children against her, creating doubt inside the home. It's psychological warfare of the highest level, and it reinforces one thing. This wasn't random. Back at the station, Daniel insists on being the one to tell his children about their mother's death. Officers hesitate but allow it. He embraces them, cries with them, holds them as they break down again. It looks compassionate, but Martinez can't shake the feeling that Daniel is always one step ahead of the process, always controlling the narrative, always positioning himself exactly where he needs to be. Still, without evidence, there's nothing more to do. The stalker remains the prime suspect, and as the day ends, Daniel leaves the station, a free man by sympathy, protected by the very lie he spent months constructing. What no one realizes yet is that the performance is about to crack. As night falls on the day of Crystal's murder, the investigation shifts gears. What began as a tragic but seemingly straightforward case, a woman killed by a stalker, starts to develop subtle inconsistencies. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just small details that don't sit quite right. Once detectives begin laying everything side by side, Detective Martinez reviews the timeline again. Crystal drops the kids off at school. She returns home. At some point after that, she's killed. Danya leaves for work later than usual. Security cameras go offline during a very specific 2-hour window. After Martinez requests the full surveillance data from Daniel's home system and nearby houses. If someone approached the property, there should be movement, a figure, a shadow, something, but the footage shows nothing. No stranger approaching the house, no unfamiliar vehicle, no one fleeing the scene. It's as if the attacker never arrived because he was already there. At the same time, Utah authorities begin following up on Anthony Holland. He's located quickly. When officers speak to him, he appears confused, intoxicated, and genuinely unaware of what's happened in Colorado. His timeline places him in Utah all morning. Receipts, witnesses, surveillance, everything checks out. Anthony may be unstable, inappropriate, and obsessed, but he isn't a murderer. Back in Colorado, that realization hits hard. If Anthony didn't do this, then who did? Martinez turns back to Daniel. He reviews Daniel's interviews, his reactions, his behavior at the scene, the way he described events, the way he cried without tears. Then he digs deeper: old reports, archived cases, anything involving Daniel's name. That's when Martinez finds it, an old stalking complaint. Years earlier, the victim, a woman named Carrie. The pattern is disturbingly familiar. Carrie describes receiving messages from multiple people, roommates, acquaintances, all urging her to reconnect with Daniel after their breakup. Over time, she realized something was wrong. Those people didn't exist. They were Daniel. Fake identities, emotional manipulation, strategic timing, the same psychological techniques now appearing in Krista's case. Martinez brings Carrie in for an interview and she speaks. The room goes quiet. She describes how Daniel created fictional characters to control her emotions, how he sabotaged her relationships, how he made her feel watched, pressured, and isolated, and how he was never caught. There wasn't enough evidence back then, but now, the parallels are impossible to ignore. At the same time, forensic analysts uncover another critical detail: that stalkers' emails. They trace back to IP addresses, not to Anthony, not to a public computer, but to Daniel's workplace. Daniel claims public Wi-Fi, shared networks. Coincidence? But coincidences don't pile up like this. Cell tower data arrives. Next, burner phones used to harass Crystal move in sync with Daniel's personal phone. Always nearby, always together. Then comes the purchase history. Gift cards used to buy those phones registered to Daniel. And finally, the search history. The night before Crystal's death, Daniel searched. How hard do you have to hit someone to make them unconscious? When does a head injury become fatal? That's no longer circumstantial. That's preparation. Martinez brings Daniel back in. This interview is different. There's no sympathy now, no soft tone, just calm pressure. Daniel senses it immediately. He deflects, minimizes, suggests alternative theories, but his confidence is gone. The story he spent months crafting is unraveling in real time. Porn confronted with the digital evidence, Daniel goes quiet. When told Anthony has an airtight alibi, he stiffens. When Martinez asks if Crystal ever suspected him, Daniel admits she didn't. And that admission changes everything. Because if Crystal confronted Daniel if she was getting close to the truth, then the motive becomes painfully clear. Control. Fear of losing his children. Fear of losing the narrative. Daniel asks for a lawyer. The interview ends, but the case doesn't. Over the next 48 hours, investigators finalize the evidence. Warrants are issued. Everything aligns. On December 16th, police move in. They arrest Daniel as he heads toward his daughter's dance performance. He doesn't resist as he's taken away. The man who convinced everyone he was the victim finally loses control. The stalker never existed. The danger never came from outside the home. It was always there, waiting. Once Daniel is taken into custody, the illusion finally collapses. 4 months. Investigators had been chasing a shadow ex-boyfriend who existed more as a digital ghost than a physical presence. Now, with Daniel behind bars, the case shifts from who did this to how far it really went. And the answer is disturbing. Detectives reconstruct the stalking campaign from the beginning, this time with Daniel not Anthony at the center. Every message, every threat, every coincidence suddenly makes sense. The burner phones were not tools of impulse. They were instruments of control. Each number was chosen to appear random, each message timed carefully to escalate Krista's fear without pushing her into full disbelief. Daniel understood pacing. He knew when to pause, when to intensify, and when to disappear completely. The fake identities weren't sloppy either. Daniel used names connected to Krista's past, places she once lived, and fragments of real people to make the deception believable. He blended truth and fiction so seamlessly that even Crystal, who lived with him, never suspected the full scope of what was happening until the end. Investigators now believe Crystal began piecing things together in the final days of her life. She noticed inconsistencies, technical details that didn't add up, the way Daniel always seemed to know what the stalker would do next. She confronted him. What exactly was said during that confrontation will never be fully known, but detectives believe it shattered Daniel's sense of control. The lie he had built so carefully, so patiently, was on the verge of collapsing, and Daniel could not allow that. The murder itself was not spontaneous rage. It was the final contingency, a last move. Daniel disabled the cameras remotely, leaving only the exterior garage feed active to suggest an intruder's presence. He waited for the narrow window when Crystal would be alone, when the kids were safe at school, when neighbors were at work. He struck quickly. There was no prolonged fight, no screams heard, no witnesses. Everything about the attack suggests speed, certainty, and planning. After Daniel cleaned himself up, left the house, and went to work, confident that the narrative he'd built would protect him. For a short time, it did. Now, detectives speak with Crystal's family again, this time with the truth in hand. Her mother is devastated, not just by the loss, but by the betrayal. She remembers comforting Daniel at the scene, holding him while he cried. The realization that she was embracing her daughter's killer is unbearable. Crystal's children struggle even more. They replay the messages they received from the stalker, the warnings, the suggestions that their mother was dangerous, that she was hiding something. Understanding now that those messages came from their father shatters their sense of reality. Therapists are brought in, support systems activated, but some damage can't be undone. The case moves quickly toward trial. Prosecutors lay out the evidence in layers: digital forensics, surveillance timelines, phone data, past behavior. Each piece alone is troubling. Together, they are overwhelming. Daniel's defense argues coincidence, stress, technical misunderstandings, but the story doesn't hold. The jury hears about Carrie, the ex-girlfriend from years earlier, the identical patterns, the same manipulations, the same emotional tactics, a rehearsal for something far worse. They hear about the searches, the burner phones, the gift cards. They see how the cameras went dark, and they hear Daniel's own words admitting Christo suspected him. In the end, the verdict is inevitable. Daniel is convicted. He is sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. No parole, no chance of rewriting the story again. Crystal's life is remembered not by the way it ended, but by the truth that finally came to light. She was not paranoid. She was not mistaken. She was not imagining danger. She was telling the truth. And the person who was supposed to protect her was the one she needed protection from. In the weeks following Daniel's arrest, the house where Crystal once lived stands silent. The police tape is gone. The patrol cars have moved on. But the weight of what happened lingers in every room. For Crystal's family, grief is no longer simple. It's layered with shock, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Her parents struggle with the reality that the man they trusted, the man who stood beside them in their darkest moment, was responsible for their daughter's death. They replay every interaction, every conversation, every moment when Daniel appeared vulnerable and broken. Now they see it for what it was, a performance. Christo's children face a different kind of trauma. Not only did they lose their mother, but they also lost their father in the same moment, one to death, the other to prison. The person they once believed was protecting them was secretly the source of their fear. Therapists describe it as dual loss, a grief so complex it rewrites a child's understanding of trust, safety, and family. Simple memories become painful. Father reading bedtime stories, family dinners, holidays, all of it is now stained by the truth. Investigators continue refining the timeline, documenting every detail for court. They confirmed that no unknown suspect ever entered the home that morning. No hidden accomplice. No outside threat. The stalker never existed. Every message Crystal received was written inside the same house where she tried to feel safe. The cruelty of that reality haunts the detectives who worked the case. Detective Martinez later admits the case changed how he views domestic crimes. Not all danger announces itself with violence or rage. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as concern, patience, and love. Daniel's ability to manipulate not just Crystal, but police, family members, and even his own children becomes a case study in psychological control. Experts analyze how long-term deception can be more destructive than overt abuse. Crystal had been fighting an enemy she couldn't see because he was standing beside her. As the trial approaches, media attention grows. Headlines focus on the perfect lie. Commentators dissect how someone so methodical could live a double life without detection for months. But for those closest to Crystal, the attention feels hollow. They want her remembered as more than a victim. They talk about her warmth, her dedication to her kids, her resilience during the months she believed she was being stalked, how she documented everything, hoping the truth would come out if something happened to her. In a way, it did. Her careful records helped expose the lie. Daniel remains mostly silent while awaiting sentencing. When he does speak, it's often about injustice, about being misunderstood. He never fully accepts responsibility in the way Crystal's family hopes he will. But denial becomes the final insult. When sentencing day arrives, the courtroom is full. Crystal's family gives impact statements. Her mother speaks through tears. Her children's words are read aloud. The judge listens carefully and then delivers the sentence. Life in prison, no parole, no second chance. As Daniel is led away, there is no dramatic outburst, no apology, no confession, just quiet resignation. The story ends not with closure, but with reality. Some wounds never heal completely, but the truth matters, and in Crystal's case, the truth was finally louder than the lie that took her life. As the case fades from headlines, its impact does not fade for those who study it. Law enforcement agencies across the country quietly begin referencing Crystal's case in training sessions, not because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the sophistication behind it. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of narrative. Control. Daniel didn't just murder his wife, he authored a story. Experts in criminal psychology point out that Daniel's greatest weapon wasn't violence, it was patience. He understood how institutions work, how police prioritize suspects, how families interpret fear, how trust delays suspicion. By inventing a stalker, Daniel created an external threat that redirected attention away from the most obvious suspect, the spouse. It's a pattern seen in rare but devastating cases. When the threat comes from outside, no one looks inward. Crystal did everything society tells victims to do. She documented the abuse. She contacted police. She asked for help. She took precautions. And still, she was not protected. That realization shakes many investigators because the failure wasn't indifference. It wasn't negligence. It was timing and manipulation. Care show. The digital evidence arrived too slowly. The lies were too well layered. The killer stayed one step ahead. In hindsight, the signs were there. The stalker knew too much. The messages adapted. too quickly. The fear inside the home seemed oddly managed rather than chaotic. But hindsight is unforgiving. Criminal psychologists later describe Daniel's behavior as a need for absolute emotional dominance. He wasn't motivated by anger alone. He was motivated by loss of control over his marriage, his children, his image. When Crystal began asserting independence, when she emotionally detached, Daniel responded not with acceptance, but with strategy. The stalking campaign was meant to pull her back emotionally, to frighten her into dependence, to make him essential again. When it failed, the plan escalated, and when Crystal confronted him, the illusion shattered. What remains is a warning. Not all abuse leaves bruises. Not all threats come from strangers. And not all victims realize who the danger truly is until it's too late. Crystal's case becomes a turning point in how some departments evaluate stalking complaints. Investigators begin asking harder questions about access, opportunity, and who benefits from fear. Because fear always benefits someone. For Crystal's family, life continues in fragments, birthdays pass, holidays arrive. The absence never feels smaller, only more familiar. They honor Crystal by speaking openly about her story, not for notoriety, but for awareness. They want people to understand that intelligence, education, and caution are not always enough. Trust can be weaponized, love can be manipulated, and evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Part 10, the story that remains. 750 words. Years later, the house has new occupants. The garage has been renovated, the walls repainted. The driveway looks ordinary again. To anyone passing by, it's just another home on a quiet street. The stories don't disappear that easily. Crystal's name lives on in court records, training manuals, and whispered conversations among investigators who remember the case that fooled everyone into. It didn't. Her children grow older carrying a truth that reshapes their lives. They learn to rebuild trust slowly, carefully. They learn that love and danger can sometimes wear the same face, and that recognizing the difference is not weakness, it's survival. Daniel remains incarcerated. He no longer controls the narrative. The story he wrote for months elapsed under the weight of facts, evidence, and truth. The identities he created vanished. The stalker he invented was erased, and the role he played so convincingly was finally exposed. What remains is accountability. Crystal is remembered not for how she died, but for how hard she tried to live safely, for how she fought an invisible enemy with logic, documentation, and courage, for how close she came to uncovering the truth. Her story becomes a reminder that justice does not always arrive in time, but when it does, it matters, because lies thrive in silence, and the truth, once uncovered, has a way of speaking long after the crime is over.